You're listening to Stark Raven here on Vancouver Cooperative Radio, CFRO 102.7 FM. And Cindy Lou's going to tell us a little bit about what's coming up in the second half of the show. She's going to be interviewing Andrew Feldmár. You want to just give us a little bit of info about that?
Sure. Here's the CD, Emily. Yeah, Andrew Feldmár is a currently practicing in Vancouver, independent psychotherapist, and he is his origins are, as far as training goes, his origins are as a disciple of R.D. Laing, and he spent a year in the mid-'70s at the Philadelphia Association, which were a cluster of houses, asylums, true asylums, set up for individuals who are going through a personal crisis or madness. Feldmár produces these models now in Vancouver, and he has some very moving and has done some work which really legitimizes and honors the experience and the experiencer of madness, which is in radical contrast to existing psychiatric practice. So, are we ready to go? Okay, here we are with Andrew Feldmár.
When I think about what I do all day, listening to people, it becomes obvious to me that there is something wrong with trying to understand the other. Because I realize that the other is infinitely other than I am. And infinitely meaning that even the dimensions on which the other is other than me is unimaginable. So if I pretended or insisted on saying that I understand you, it would be tantamount to colonization. It would be like the British understood the Indians. They didn't. Or like Europeans understood the Chinese. They didn't. Understand is trying to put someone who is infinitely other into categories that are familiar to oneself. And the other may totally transcend my own categories. So if I'm not trying to understand the other, what do I do when I sit as someone's psychotherapist? Well, I try to engage with the other. I try to be with the other. I try to love the other. I don't have to understand you in order for me to love you. I have to listen to you. I have to treat you as a legitimate other. Now, legitimacy means that I don't ask you to account for yourself. Legitimacy means that if I find you acting in a way that I wouldn't act, I would be curious as to what your world is like, from which it is legitimate to act as you do. So one of the fundamental moves in the kind of therapy that I think is useful is to always ask, under what conditions would what the other is doing be normal? That's the most useful question that I can ask. Now, when someone says that they need time out from worldly concerns, from survival concerns, when somebody gets very tired in the struggle of surviving, I take their word for it. I mean, if I were tired, I would want a safe place where I can catch my breath, where I don't have to be ashamed of wanting time out, where somebody would reassure me that I can take my time, that I can come back to myself. If I'm staggered, that I will have a safe place in which to orient myself again. Here in Vancouver, for about over 15 years, I tried to set up a safe house, an asylum, a true asylum, where people could go through difficult times without anybody interfering with them, without anybody presuming that they know better what's good for the other than the other knows himself or herself. Now, I ran into enormous difficulties. There were government officials who basically said to me, over my dead body. Why? Because the only question they were interested in is, will I enforce their meds? Not ours, theirs. And I said, well, if somebody wants to take medication, we'll make sure that they do, and they will have the resources to do so safely and professionally. And if somebody doesn't want to take medication, we'll support them and we'll help them in whatever it is that they decide they want to do. Well, that just wasn't good enough, because for politicians, their only concern is to cover their asses. Basically, they want to avoid what they call scandal. And if in a house like the one I imagined, anything happens, even the kind of things that could happen in any hospital, if the treatment, so-called, was not the standard treatment that today's professional psychiatrist would prescribe, then the politician would be in trouble. Then they would be asked, how come that some crackpot is running this place? Now, I actually had fun with the idea of crackpot, because crack is schizo, and pot is another word for head, which in Greek is phrenos. So a crackpot is actually a schizophrenic. Not only that, phrenos in Greek also meant heart. The Greeks didn't differentiate between head and heart. So schizophrenic actually means broken-hearted, or a crackpot. So to come back to what I've done, since there is no safe house in Vancouver, often when somebody wanted to stop, basically gather themselves, I would ask them to call together anyone who cared about them, family, friends, and I formed a support group. And for months at a time, the person who was going through a hard time would be supported by their support group. And my main job would be to work with the group, not even with the person who is taking time out. Most of the work with the group, certainly after a couple of months, was to overcome their envy. After a couple of months, when somebody was looking after this person's finances, another person was looking after this person's shopping, somebody was cooking for them, somebody was making sure that they had company if they needed company, somebody was taking care of their medical needs, somebody in the group would say, well, how long is this going to go on? I'd love to be taken care of like this. And that reminded me of Thomas Sass, when he once said that it's very easy to get lots of money for torturing people, like we do in mental hospitals. Who wouldn't give money to somebody? Who would envy somebody who is put on major antipsychotics or neuroleptics or that sort of crippling medication, or given courses of electroshock therapy? we can fork out the money for that. On the other hand, if we were housing people who were going through difficult times in something like a first-class hotel and giving them caring, loving support, there would be no money forthcoming because the people who have the money would envy the people who would be treated so caringly, so lovingly. So unfortunately, we are still living in the dark ages as far as giving each other a hand when living gets difficult. When someone who is disturbing, by the way, most people get attention and get to a psychiatrist not because they are disturbed, but because they are disturbing. Very soon after someone consults me who is having experiences, unusual experiences, the politics of the situation is how to avoid detection, how to avoid those who have the power to start legislating as to what experiences are allowed and what experiences are not allowed. Laing used to talk about epistemological and experiential anarchy, that if it was up to him, it would be nobody's business what kind of experiences somebody has. And it would be nobody's business how somebody knew what they knew. Like, for example, if I knew things about you by reading your aura, whose business is that? Just because most people don't see auras, if I make my decisions based on me seeing auras, it's nobody's business. So that's epistemological anarchy. How I know what I know is my own private business, cannot be legislated, should not be legislated. If I say I hear voices and the voices tell me which way I should go, that's nobody's business. So what I experience and how I know what I know should be my private concern. Now, that's not the same as anarchy as far as actions are concerned. Laing and I both considered it a matter of ethics as to how we treat each other, as to what we do. But most people who are labeled mad or schizophrenic actually are far less harmful than several presidents of the United States have been, as far as their actions are concerned. It's just that when someone reveals to the wrong person what their experiences are, how they know what they know, those people in power get disturbed, and then they start treating you for your own good to homogenize your experience to fit in with the norm, what is normal. Now, ancient alchemists used to have a saying, do, dare, and be silent. And one of the lessons that someone who is having unusual experiences, one of the lessons he or she has to learn is just this. You have to be very careful who you talk to. You talk to the wrong person, you end up incarcerated and suffering experiences you never wanted to experience. You unleash people doing things to you that you would never choose in a million years. You lose power. So one of the first things that a therapist in my position has to communicate is that I will do nothing to the other. And I can't say that. I can't say, trust me. One has to read this. One either reads it or doesn't read it. But certainly that would be my major concern. When someone who is frightened comes to see me, somehow I have to communicate with my entire being that I will not make matters worse. Now, no psychiatrist that I know even remotely thought this one through, that perhaps all the varieties of mental illness boil down to varieties of the flowers of terror. One person consulted R.D. Laing, who said the walls were talking to her, the chair was talking to her, inanimate objects were talking to her. Without going into a long story, Laing could feel that the person was terrified. So, through his own heart being calm and unafraid, just through his presence, after a while, he communicated there was nothing to be afraid of around him in the room where they were. So eventually the person calmed down and started to be unafraid. One can be so terrified that one forgets what one is frightened of. And then one's behavior and the experiences one talks about are so strange that if you don't know, if you can't feel that basically this person is just terrified, you start classifying what kind of mental illness this person has, when basically they are afraid. So once this person was unafraid, she was able to tell him that her father was regularly, several times a week, raping her. Laing said, don't go home. Here is an address, here is a safe house. I will notify your parents that you're not coming home. And they won't know where you are. The only way they can communicate to you will be through me, and I will protect your whereabouts. Now what I suggest is that right away you learn a martial arts. Pick up Aikido, Judo, Karate, whatever, and don't stop until you have a black belt. Once you have a black belt, you can go home. Now this person needed no therapy. If this person would have gotten into the hands of a run-of-the-mill psychiatrist, this person would have been shunted into the direction of taking up a career as a mental patient. Notice, Laing did not even say that you should come back for therapy. Didn't have to deal with the past. What saved this woman was the future. That in 3 years or so, she could see that she could get a black belt in karate and go home and say to her father, you take one step towards me and I'll let you have it. That was it. No more voices, no more talking from the walls, no more talking from chairs. There is a continuum of states of consciousness from absolute stillness, samadhi, to total agitation like St. Vitus's dance. There is a rainbow of consciousness where the normal state of consciousness is just a tiny bit somewhere in the middle. Now most people are locked in there, they don't go anywhere else. I think people who get into the hands of psychiatrists are people who start to travel on this continuum and get into other states of consciousness, get scared, and can't find their way back to normal state of consciousness when it would be advisable so that others don't find out about where they have been. So, to put it simply, as long as I am free to travel in various states of consciousness, I'm not going to be frightened. It's only when somebody gets stuck is where they need a hand to find their way out of the thick of the woods. And the best guide is somebody who has been in those woods and who isn't afraid. I sometimes make a comparison between midwifery and psychotherapy. A good midwife is someone who has attended so many births that nothing frightens her. She's seen everything. So just by her sheer presence, she radiates calm. And the woman who is giving birth in such a midwife's company gets infected by her calm, will not be scared. And what interferes with giving birth is fear. Now, I think obstetricians frighten the living daylights out of women. So I think obstetrics to giving birth is the same as psychiatry is to those who are going through altered states of consciousness. Whereas a real guide, a real psychotherapist is like a seasoned midwife who, through his whole being, can radiate the fact, I've been there, I got out of there, I'll stay with you, keep you company, until we'll find our way out. In 1992, I gave myself a year off, and I went to teach in Hungary for a semester at 2 universities. It was very interesting that a group of psychiatrists wanted to get together and asked me to give them seminars. One of them wisely set down the rule that they invited only psychiatrists who have not been out of school for more than 5 years. And I asked them how come they made that rule. And they said that once you have been practicing psychiatry for more than 5 years, you are far too invested in what it is that you're doing to even open your ears to doing it differently. They figured that it's about 5 years. If you have worked less than 5 years, then you still haven't done so much harm that you can't admit to yourself that you are doing harm. Laing took very seriously the Hippocratic Oath of do no harm. I don't think any psychiatrist today takes that one seriously. We don't know what harm the drugs do that they prescribe. We don't know what harm it does to look at someone with an objectifying eye and think about them as if we were not them. It actually worked. The dozen psychiatrists who came week after week to talk with me were extremely open to a whole different way of looking at how we can be of help to each other and others. As a result of those meetings, an actual asylum got started in Budapest. For 15 years I was trying to get one going here in Vancouver without success. There, after 3 months, one got going. Not without opposition, but with a lot of down-to-earth support. One of the reasons why I think that a house where someone can go, where they don't feel that they want to deal with the chores of ordinary day-to-day living, is because not everyone has the economic circumstances to find support when they need it. I think that Laing's original idea was that every neighborhood should have a house that would basically be open to whoever felt like taking refuge there, regardless of whether they were rich or poor, whether they were educated or uneducated. When one is in an altered state of consciousness, one's socioeconomic status, one's educational level is absolutely and totally immaterial. there are times when, by the way, the actions of a so-called schizophrenic are perfectly understandable if only you realize that they are that they have regressed to a very early age, sometimes that of a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old, or often even a 6-month-old. Now, psychiatry, by and large, looks askance at anything that smacks of regression. My experience, however, is that if the regression is supported, if the regression is made safe, if one is not shamed for acting younger than one actually is, then regression can be extremely healing. It's as if one has been trying to get ahead with one's tail nailed somewhere in the past. And it's like an elastic band is pulling oneself back, and one is really leaning into it, and the going into the future gets harder and harder. Well, at a certain point, the elastic band snaps you right back to where you were nailed to the ground. And that's an opportunity to take the nail out. And once the nail is out and you reconnect with who you were before you got nailed there, then you can come forward again without the elastic band. And that is the model of healing that R.D. Laing found actually worked time after time after time. If only opportunity was given for someone to go back to where they got nailed, take the nail out, reconnect with who they were before they got nailed, and then come forward at their own speed. Now, sometimes going back takes a while. Like for Julian, it took 3 years. The going forward, once you have reconnected with yourself, is very fast. It took him about 3 months. And this process, there is no blueprint for it. It takes as long as it takes. I've seen somebody go back and come forward over a weekend. I've seen someone taking 3 years. I've seen someone losing their way and never finding their way out. So one takes one's chances. The whole idea of medication or being treated, say, with electroshock, the assumption, first of all, is that there is an expert who knows what's good for me, and therefore I am in this expert's care. And basically, this expert can do with me as they like. The moment I start taking a drug, I get hopelessly confused. I don't know from that moment on whether anything I experience is my experience, whether it's the drug that I am experiencing, how does the drug alter my experiences. So if I felt lost already, after taking neuroleptics, I would feel even more lost. Unless I absolutely give up responsibility for myself and basically take up the career of a mental patient, which is basically someone who is supposed to slavishly follow what experts tell her or him that he needs to do. So it's an infantilizing process. I remember Laing saying that he would rather spend time in jail than in a mental hospital because at least his experience, his nervous system would not be interfered with. And that's not saying that I would not experiment with any drug that a psychiatrist offered me, but I would want to remain in charge of whether I want to take more or less. I would want to be the experimenter, and I would want to use the psychiatrist as an advisor. Never would I want to be in a psychiatrist's care. Now, as far as shock treatment is concerned, in spite of the fact that some people will testify that it saved their lives, I can't see that it does anything else. That hitting someone over the head with a baseball bat wouldn't do. Now, I don't think that I could justify to myself hitting anyone over the head with a baseball bat, even if after I do that, people would be grateful for how I saved their lives. There is not a shred of evidence or understanding of why it should work, how it should work. If you really look at it, it is a horrendous punishment. I think in a way it would be more humane to have people drink their own piss. That would motivate somebody to get better. Actually, there are people, in fact, Gandhi proposed that it's a good idea to drink your pee when you're ill, and it will hasten your recovery. Now, I always thought it's probably because one wants to stop the medication. I think that maybe someone will put on a cheerful face just not to be shocked anymore. But I can't see that something that was discovered and invented to stun animals who were about to be butchered is going to be useful for the salvation of human beings. What was common experience in all the asylums was that the person who needed to go through something that others found disturbing basically needed protection against ordinary demands made either by family or by society. So actually the people who worked with these people had to provide like a cast on a broken arm. I mean, when you put a cast on a broken arm, you're really not doing anything. You're just keeping outside impact and forces and stresses off the bone so it can heal. So the asylum and all my work would center around you if you felt disturbed, just to keep all demands off, all pressures off, so that you can do whatever needs to be done. Nobody needs to do anything to the bone. It just needs to be left alone. Most people simply need to be left alone and they heal. So a lot of work that has to be done with the family and friends and social agencies to keep them away long enough that the person who is going through a difficult time can eventually take them on again. Often the people who worked in these houses had to have a whole different culture, so to speak, inwards, which was nurturing, warm, mothering, and a whole different attitude outside to keep away family, to keep away intruders, to keep away people who demanded things, which was very heroic, very fatherly, very male, warrior-like. So inside maternal, outside warrior-like.
Nope.
That's the framework which allowed someone to heal.
You are listening to Stark Raven on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 102.7. And we have been listening to Andrew Feldmár, a psychotherapist in independent practice in Vancouver for over 35 years. Feldmár produces models of therapy that work to move and legitimize and honor the experience and experiencer of madness.